Hello, welcome back to the She Wrote This Part podcast. I'm Adriana, a certified clinical hypnotherapist specializing in subconscious reprogramming, which is really just a fancy way of saying I help people figure out why they keep getting in their own way and then actually doing something about it on the subconscious level. And I think that might be the most concise way I've ever summed up what I do. um, I'm just going to dive right into today's episode with a story about a point in my life right after COVID. We're talking like maybe 1 year into quarantine, and I was getting so freaking sleepy. I was getting so tired at a certain point in the day. It was like clockwork. It was like a certain time of the day would hit, and I would just get this wave of sleepiness, could not keep my eyes open, genuinely affecting my life type of sleepy. It was really problematic because I'm not kidding. I could not keep my eyes open. I don't know if you've ever seen that gif of like, who is it, Goofy, I think, like taping his eyelids open. That's what I was feeling I was needing. It was ridiculous. I was asleep in the middle of the day, like working my corporate job. I was getting so sleepy. I didn't know what it was. And I know that, if you work a corporate job, you're like, yeah, same. But this was different. This was like very problematic. And I did the responsible thing. I went to the doctor and I told her what was happening. And she looked at me pretty concerned and she was like, we need to get you checked out for epilepsy. This is so embarrassing. I'm editing this video and I meant to say narcolepsy, not epilepsy. Eek. Oopsies. Carry on. And I started laughing, and epilepsy is not funny. So it wasn't about that. I want to make that clear. But in that moment, with everything I knew about myself, about my body, and at this point, it felt like the most absurd diagnosis ever. That it was almost laughable. Like my gut was genuinely giggling. I had done enough work on myself, thankfully, at this point that I could at least trust that that piece of advice was incorrect. You just know sometimes, and I just knew in that moment that I knew I was getting sleepy, but I knew it wasn't epilepsy. And the thing with the healthcare system and really life in general is that, sometimes you just got to figure out your own answers, right? So I did. I went on this little journey to figure out what the heck was causing me to be so sleepy since, I wasn't going to get the answers at the doctor's. And you know what it was? It was the couch. This exact couch I'm sitting on right now, it was the couch. I was working from the couch every single day, and I would hit a certain point in the afternoon, I would get really comfy, and I would just go down. And then when I stopped working on the couch, I stopped falling asleep. I stopped getting so sleepy, and that was it. That was the whole thing. It was the couch. And this is really funny because if you know me, you know that this is not entirely shocking. I have maybe a 30-minute window where I'm sitting on the couch before it takes me. And it's one of those things. It's one of those things about me, about my life. So in hindsight, it does feel a little obvious, a little bit of like, Adriana, come on, like you should have known. But in the moment, I just couldn't see it. I couldn't connect those dots. And what I think about all of the time with this story is, what if I had gone down the epilepsy road? What if I trusted that diagnosis, started getting tested, and started treating something that was never actually the problem to begin with? Like, how long would I have been trying to solve a problem, the wrong problem? How long would I have been solving for the wrong thing? And I tell you this because I watch this happen now. all of the time, not with epilepsy, but within my clients, I see this happen all of the time where someone is up at 4 a.m. doing research that they'll never use, or feeling this weird pressure when they're with someone that they like, or they notice, this mental chatter the second that they try to slow down, and they're not calling it anxiety. They're calling it ambition or overthinking or just being a lot. And I'm here to tell you that that is the wrong diagnosis. And I'm using the word diagnosis broadly here, but yes, it is not overthinking, it is not ambition, it is anxiety in a different form. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So let's start with what most people think anxiety is. Because if I asked you right now to picture someone with anxiety, you would probably picture something very specific, right? You would picture someone like visibly anxious. Like they're spiraling, they can't leave the house, they're having a panic attack in the parking lot, maybe they got a prescription, they're in therapy every week, multiple times a week, they can't really function, right? They cancel a lot and you don't really know why. That's all real. It exists, and I am not downplaying that. But I am here to tell you that is not the only way anxiety looks in life. I'm here to tell you that that is the loudest version of anxiety, and most anxiety is not loud. Most anxiety does not announce itself. It doesn't like tap you on the shoulder and go, hey, just so you know, it's here, I'm here, it's me. It just kind of runs quietly in the background, sort of like an app on your phone that you never open, but it's just quietly draining your battery in the background this whole time. And because we have just collectively decided that anxiety looks like visible stress, a lot of people are walking around completely unaware that what they're experiencing qualifies. They hear the word anxiety and they think, that's not me. I'm functioning, I'm successful, I'm busy, but like productive busy. I just have high standards. I just like to be prepared. So they opt out of the conversation entirely, which means that they also opt out of the solution. And that's the thing that keeps me up at night. Not on this couch. I've learned my lesson. But it keeps me up at night because I watch people day in and day out say, oh, I don't have anxiety. And then they opt out of the solution when really they do have anxiety. It's just a different flavor. It's showing up visibly in a different way. And that pains me because there is a clear path that they can go down, but they're deciding not to go down it because they're opting out, but it's just a lack of awareness. So that's what I'm here for today. I'm here to introduce you to a new way of viewing anxiety and giving it a name that I think it deserves, which is subconscious anxiety. This is the term I use in my practice to describe anxiety that is operating below the level of your conscious awareness, meaning you're not sitting there thinking, I'm anxious right now. You're just doing your thing. You're just living your life. You're doing the thing that feels right for you in the moment. You're running the pattern. You're responding in the way that feels like how you always respond. And it just feels completely normal because it's been normal for so long. And the distinction I want you to sit with is that conscious anxiety you can feel. It has a texture. It has a tightness, a racing heart, that specific dread that shows up before saying something scary, and you know it's there. There is also subconscious anxiety that you perform. You organize yourself around it. You shape shift around it. You build entire systems and habits and personality traits around it with ever once calling it what it is. And this is where my world, subconscious reprogramming, comes in, because the conscious mind, it only accounts for 12% of what's actually driving your behavior. The other 88% is all subconscious, which means if your anxiety is living down there, no amount of conscious reframing or breathing through it is ever going to touch it. You can manage it, you can manage the symptoms, but you're never going to move it. And my clients, they don't come to me saying, I have anxiety. They come to me saying, I can't stop collecting information. I feel this weird pressure that I can't name and I can't explain it. Or I feel like I need to perform and I don't know why. And when I reflect back, yeah, that sounds like there's like an anxiety that's running under the surface and maybe it's been there for a while. And they go, oh, yeah. And that oh moment is exactly what this episode is for. Because you can't address something you haven't named, and you definitely can't shift something that you don't know is there. And if you've been listening to this and you're starting to feel like, oh, this is feeling a little familiar, good. Stay with that. For now, let's get specific though, because I think this lands better when you can actually kind of see the contrast, the difference between them side by side. Well, hear it, I guess, if you're listening to this. Anyway, so conscious anxiety, the kind of anxiety that most people recognize, it tends to show up in ways that are really hard to ignore, right? This is the stuff that you're more used to hearing around the topic or the conversation of anxiety. You hear and you feel that racing heart before a big presentation, or that dread that you feel before you have a conversation and then you end up putting it off for 2 weeks. You waking up at 3 a.m. and your mind is immediately giving you like a highlight reel of everything that could go wrong. You feel it in your body. There's a shortness of breath. You feel like something's off. You might not call it anxiety, but something is happening. And the thing about this is that you feel it, you sense it, it's there, you can name it. And that's the trouble that my clients are having, is that there's an anxiety that is there, but because it doesn't feel like a sensation in the body, that they're just assuming that it's not an anxiety. But I would just say that there's different levels. This conscious anxiety is one that you can feel, but the subconscious anxiety doesn't show up like that. The conscious anxiety that you're used to is the one that's making it into all of the cultural conversations about anxiety. It's the one that's getting the awareness campaigns on social media. The subconscious anxiety doesn't show up like any of this. It shows up as behavior that feels completely logical, completely justified, sometimes even admirable. And that's exactly what makes it so easy to miss and so easy to just keep living with indefinitely. So I want you to see what I see in sessions with real people who have come to me for something else entirely, and how it's actually anxiety showing up. So I'm going to give you some examples. I'm going to walk through 4 different patterns, 4 big patterns that does not encompass all of the patterns that I see, but these are just patterns that showed up just this week. And I want you to see how it's presented in a way from my clients as something else, but I want you to see how it's actually an anxiety that's running under the surface in the subconscious. So we're going to go through these 4 patterns. And pattern 1 is scanning for information or threat. This is one of the ones that looks the most like productivity. So it might possibly be the sneakiest because it feels productive. It's the constant research, the preparation, the staying one step ahead. On the surface, it looks like diligence, right? It looks like you're being ambitious, you're being responsible, you're being someone who's informed. You know what? I see a lot of this with news and media. There's an anxiety under the surface that is driving clients to scan the media, scan for information, consume more. And it feels like I just want to be informed. I just want to be informed. I want to know what's going on. And it's the same thing, whether it's showing up in work or in media or in friendships, The tell is that the information never actually lands. The information that you're consuming doesn't actually create any relief. You finish one deep dive and then you immediately need another one, because the goal was never actually to be informed. Again, the subconscious goal. You think the goal is to be informed, but the subconscious goal, the thing that is driving that behavior, was never actually to be informed. The thing driving that behavior subconsciously is to feel safe. And that feeling, it never quite arrives because information isn't inherently what makes you safe, right? So the way that this showed up this week actually is that I had a client who's a super high performer, so sharp, so intelligent, who was getting up at 4 a.m. to run competitor analysis on every potential competitor in his sales territory, every single one, which sounds responsible, doesn't it? It sounds like he's just doing a really great job. He's so good at his job. The problem is that this data wasn't actually being used at all. It was just kind of sitting in files and collecting dust, almost as like a just in case file bank database. And it wasn't changing the strategy. It wasn't informing their pitches. It was just happening. 4 a.m. before the sun came up, he came to me talking about how he was wanting to optimize and performance this and optimize that. And I just sat with him for a second and I was like, that sounds exhausting. And his face told me everything. Because when I said, what do you think would happen if he didn't wake up and he didn't gather all that data? You can see that idea in and of itself felt genuinely threatening. And that's not ambition. That's subconscious anxiety doing what it does, scanning, preparing, trying to outrun a threat that isn't actually coming. So again, this is an example of the behavior feels like it's got good intention. Oh, I'm just being ambitious. But under the surface, there's this subconscious anxiety that wants to and needs to scan and prepare for threat, right? So it's actually what's driving the behavior. He didn't feel like in his body, he didn't feel like, oh my gosh, I've got a tightness in my chest. Oh my gosh, I've got shallow breathing. He was just acting on whatever behavior felt natural to him. And it was subconscious anxiety that was driving the behavior. So pattern number 2, performing in connection. So this one shows up the most in relationships and social situations, and it's so normalized that most people don't actually clock it as anything other than being a good person or being a considerate presence. It's the feeling that you need to keep the energy up, that that pressure you feel to like fill the silence, to make sure everyone's okay, make sure everyone is having a good time. If you're choosing something for you guys to do, that like you got to make sure that like they like it and that they're comfortable, and you're making sure that like you come across well. There is a low hum of monitoring that's happening the entire time you're with someone, and it is exhausting in a way that's really hard to explain, because from the outside, you just look like someone who's engaged and attentive and caring and fun to be around. And this showed up this week with a client who recently started dating someone that she genuinely really liked, but instead of enjoying her time with him, she was describing this pressure that she was feeling every time that they were together. This need to keep the conversation going and to make sure that he was having a good time and to fill any silence before it would become awkward. And so she didn't feel it as anxiety. She just felt it as pressure. She would just say, I just feel a lot of pressure. And when I asked her what she thought would happen if like she just let there be a quiet moment, she didn't have an answer. It felt so threatening, because the subconscious doesn't need a logical reason. It just needs to keep performing, just in case. That's what it does. It just needs to keep performing to keep you safe. All stemming from subconscious programming. But once again, behavior whose intention was being driven by subconscious anxiety. Pattern number 3 is mental chatter when you slow down. This is one that I want you to really pay attention to, because it's so common and it's completely misread. I think we all deal with mental chatter, and it's always coming from a subconscious place. So it's kind of a dead giveaway. If there's some sort of mental chatter, mental like criticism, inner critic type of thing, there's always some subconscious layer there. But specifically this week, I saw it coming up in clients who were wanting to do things for themselves that were going against their conditioning. P.S. This is conditioning-based anxiety, which we talk about inside of the anxiety shift. They were trying to do things for themselves, but then feeling anxious about it. So like this happens when you finally carve out time for yourself, or you sit down to read, or you take a bath, or you just exist for a moment without an agenda. And instead of it feeling like rest, your mind starts just like going through your to-do list, or thinking about the things that you said 3 days ago, or the plan that you haven't made yet, or the things that you should be doing instead, or whatever it is. There's this low grade noise in your head that shows up specifically when you're trying to be still. The mental chatter doesn't need slowing down to show up. The mental chatter will always show up when you're going against some sort of subconscious conditioning. But for this example that showed up, it was coming up for this client when they were trying to slow down. She was trying to do something good for herself, going to the gym, eating healthy, making these really great, aligned, authentic decisions. But every time she was doing them, there was so much mental chatter of like, should you really be doing that? Who do you think you are? Shouldn't you do that instead? You think you're too good for us now. Like there's just this inner dialogue that was happening. Again, she did not name it as anxiety, but that is subconscious anxiety. That is a subconscious pattern that has formed from very long ago. This particular client, it had a lot of different legs, and it was all coming from whatever she learned growing up, which is always a subconscious thing. So pattern 4 is doom scrolling as threat detection. So this one might feel a little uncomfy and a little like uncomfortably relatable, and I'm not sorry about it because I need to bring it to your attention. The late night scroll. The wellness content rabbit hole at 11 p.m. The podcast about optimizing and healing and becoming. And on one level, it looks like self-improvement, like you're someone who cares about growth, about staying informed, about doing the work, and that is all great, and I am not taking that away from you, but I just want you to notice when you're in that impulsive state and you're consuming, do you notice how you feel afterwards? Does consuming all of that information actually make you feel better? Does it make you feel more settled and more relief, more grounded, more clear? Or does it just generate more things to think about, more gaps to close, more things that you should probably be doing? Because there is a version of consuming wellness content that is genuinely nourishing, and then there is a version that is just scanning dressed up as a self-help aesthetic. Your subconscious found a very socially acceptable way to stay in threat detection mode at 11 p.m. when you should be asleep. And it even made it feel productive, which is honestly impressive, incredibly annoying, but very impressive. So these aren't the only ways subconscious anxiety shows up. Not even close. These were just the ones that I see most consistently in sessions. Honestly, these are just ones that popped up in sessions this week, so they were top of mind for me to put into this episode. So if you're listening to this and you're experiencing something and you're like, is that anxiety? And like you want to know like if it falls under the subconscious anxiety category, send me an email, send me a DM, we can chat about it. Okay. So that was a lot. And if your mind is currently doing that thing where it's like, wait, that's me, oh God, that's definitely me, do not let yourself go down the shame spiral. Do not go down the shame spiral. This is just to build up an awareness. Every single thing you learn about the subconscious mind gives you a very valuable piece of information that it is not you, it is something you learned, and if you learned it, you can unlearn it. So do not go down the shame spiral on me now. Take a second, take a sip of your coffee, your tea, your water, definitely water. Take a deep breath. We covered a lot, and I want to make sure this next section lands. Okay. So, when subconscious anxiety is running undetected, it is making quiet decisions for you. Not dramatic, obvious ones, or in dramatic, obvious ways, but in a quiet, completely invisible way that you will rationalize every single time because it will always feel like logic. It will always feel like the responsible choice, the smart move, the thing a prepared, self aware person would do. But what's actually happening underneath is every decision that comes from a place of subconscious anxiety is a conditioned response, meaning it's not coming from you. It's coming from a pattern that was wired a long time ago in a completely different context, trying to solve a problem that may not even exist anymore. And you are living your life from that place without even knowing it. And that's why I am so passionate about sharing this, making this known to you, because you are living your life from a place of conditioning. And this is where I want to connect something for you. If you are trying to live an aligned life, and I'm guessing you are because you're here, alignment requires that your decisions actually come from you, from what you want, from what feels true to you, your actual values and desires and sense of self, not from a subconscious pattern that learned to stay safe by scanning, performing, filling the space, staying one step ahead. You cannot navigate toward your aligned path from a conditioned response. You just can't. You might get somewhere, but it's not going to feel authentic. It's not going to feel like yours when you get there. And that's the sneaky part, is you feel like you're progressing. You feel like you're working towards the goal, but then you get to the goal and you're like, why am I not happy? Well, because it wasn't an authentic path. The intentions that were driving those decisions were coming from conditioned responses. And the really, 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 really sneaky thing about subconscious anxiety specifically is that because it's undetected, you don't even know your navigation system is off. You think you're making clear-headed, intentional decisions. You think you're choosing, and in some ways you are, but there's a very loud, silent partner involved that you haven't been introduced to yet. And that's the importance of this work. That's the importance of separating yourself from your conditioning. That's the importance of this recognition that we're talking about here. You don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to have done the work yet, but naming it, just being able to say, oh yeah, that's definitely a subconscious anxiety. That's a pattern. That's not actually me. That tiny moment of awareness is so, so crucial. I cannot even start to tell you. That is so crucial because that creates space. And in that space, you can now make a more authentic, aligned decision. But you can't reclaim a decision-making process that you don't know has been hijacked. That is the importance of this. Mic drop. So that oh moment, that subconscious anxiety moment, that's the whole thing. That's where it starts. It's not some big dramatic realization moment. It's just that quiet little, oh, so that's what that is. That is so crucial. And if you have that today, even just a little bit, I want you to acknowledge that. And I want you to sit with it. You don't have to go down some rabbit hole. But when you are ready to do something with it, the anxiety shift is the place. That is where you will be updating the patterns, beliefs, the inherited scripts that have been running your life at the source. So that way you can shed the version of yourself built by conditioning and finally make choices from what you actually want, not from what feels safest or most acceptable or least likely to cause a problem, because the rules that were making those decisions for you will have finally been updated at the subconscious source. So The anxiety shift is the place you want to be. If you are ready to do something about this, the link is in the show notes, or you can just DM me or send me an email. I'm not a robot, I promise. I am just someone on a mission to make you see and believe that subconscious anxiety is a thing. It is present in your life, but it is not a life sentence. It is not just how you are. It is not a personality trait you have to manage forever, or you have to do your box breathing to get by, or you have got to white knuckle your way through. It is just a subconscious pattern. And patterns, when you get underneath them at the subconscious level, can absolutely, with certainty, shift. Genuinely shift. Not coping, not managing, shifting. So, on that note, I hope you learned something. If you have any questions, send me a comment, DM, email, find me on Instagram, TikTok. And that's all I've got for you today. So on that note, I'm going to go do something very important, which is sit on my couch and immediately fall asleep. Just kidding. I learned my lesson. I will talk to you next week. Have a good one. Bye.